Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are back doing another World Cup group breakdown. Today we're taking a look at the APAC A or Asia Pacific A conference. There are 6 teams in this group, no wildcard teams here, so a little bit more straightforward in the teams that we have here. You can see the countries in this group are Chinese Taipei / Taiwan, whichever one you want to roll with, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea. So an interesting group here. Clear top-level team at the end there. But let's just dive in. Let's jump in and let's talk about each of these teams, each of the countries here represented, and I'll give you my thoughts on kind of how I think it should go based on kind of what we have seen so far. So we'll start at the top with Taiwan or Chinese Taipei. An interesting team here. You can see their roster here. They have Hope, Light, and Via as their damage trio. They have Nexus and Tomato as tanks, and Dash and Raymomo as their supports. 3 of the players on this team play for the team Kraken Esports Club, who did compete in the Contenders Asia Pacific Spring Series. Last month or a month or 2 ago. I don't remember exactly when. I think it was in early April. Late March, actually. And Kraken did not have a great performance. They lost to Wall Play, and then they lost to Angelica Esports. So they were pretty quickly eliminated from the tournament, though they did take a map in both of those games. For anyone who is wondering, Wall Play is a team predominantly made up of players from Singapore, but also some other kind of countries represented as well, and Angelica is primarily Thai players, none of which are really kind of top-level players from either of those countries, so not a great performance out of them there, but then you also have, of course, Light, who plays for UC Irvine in Contenders, or in Collegiate in North America. So it's an interesting team with definitely some talent on there who is represented in Contenders. It's not a team made up primarily of players from, like just open division or anything like that. But it's certainly a team that has a bit of a weakness in terms of their kind of overall level of play. They're not a team that I expect to dominate anybody in this group in terms of just like pure talent. They're not a team that I think is significantly better than most teams in this group. Though I definitely think they have clear talent. They have areas where they can do well. We've seen Taiwanese players do well and stuff like the Overwatch League. Players like Bacon Jack and A-Ting, I believe, are 2 players from Taiwan. So definitely room for some of these players to be pretty good. Like we've seen some of them make it to the top level. It's not impossible for this team to, at least be present, but I don't expect them to be kind of an elite level team in this group. Let's move on now to Hong Kong, another team in this region that could be okay, but once again, it's kind of tough. But we can see the roster here. They have Despair, Kurumi, and Xiaolan as their damage trio. They have 1 tank, R3K, and then they have a support trio of Am Crazy, Mango Jai, and IRP. Kind of an interesting team here, just kind of looking at what they did in how they built it. Lots of guys who presumably are open division, kind of ladder players. Not a ton of big name players here. They're a team that I always kind of expect to do somewhat better than they end up actually doing. They don't typically perform the best in the World Cup. If you go back to 2019, they did manage to win a game against Paraguay in the kind of early preliminary rounds, but then they got beaten by Germany pretty handily after that. If you want to use Taiwan as Chinese Taipei, I didn't talk about their results, but they got 3-1 by Denmark. Which is pretty impressive considering how good Denmark was. So if you want to just compare these 2 teams in terms of what we can expect out of Hong Kong and their general talent, usually versus Taiwanese talent, typically Taiwan is a bit of a better region. They have better players usually. So Hong Kong, they certainly have room. I think the interesting player to watch is R3K, a player who is on DAF Esports, which is the team where a lot of the Thai players are from. And he's, a really good tank player, right? Known for kind of his tank play. I think he'll be the big key element to this team. He is the only tank player in this roster, so they're going to play around him quite a bit, I would imagine, as kind of their kind of center focal point for this team. But I certainly think that they are going to be one of the teams to kind of look out for. I think between Taiwan and Hong Kong, you have one of those teams I think will probably advance. It just depends on kind of how they play. The other teams in this region, I think, are either clearly better or worse. So to me, it's really those first two teams are kind of the most interesting ones in this group in terms of how they perform. We'll see what happens, but I do, generally speaking, think this Hong Kong roster has some talent on it that could certainly cause problems in this group. But I think that they are not a team that has the depth that typically you want to see out of a team that should try to advance out of the kind of this kind of regional qualifier stage, whatever it is, of the World Cup. Up next, we have Indonesia. Their roster consists of Proxies, Speed 75, and SJS as their damage players. They have Zekrom and Gisi as their tanks. Nice to see another Pokemon name representing in the league or in the World Cup. And then their supports are Chenli and Shrimp. So once again, not a lot of kind of relative unknowns in the kind of contenders scene. Chenli is someone who played in 2020 in contenders and some, I don't know, contenders, just some tournaments and stuff back in the day. Not a huge kind of big name thing for here, but he is one of the guys who did well in the Indonesia Open Trials. That's where a lot of these guys kind of come from. So not super surprising that we have some of these guys here. But this is really the interesting kind of area in this region. Unlike Europe, which I kind of talked about in the MEC A video, where I kind of said there's a lot of kind of really interesting competition, where a lot of teams have like one or two players that are really well known, minimum, and then like a couple guys kind of there. And there are some kind of areas where there could be some kind of potential level of competition, which is pretty close. APAC has a lot of really kind of middling teams that just we have not seen do much of anything in the history of the Overwatch League. Indonesia, I don't even think has played in the World Cup before, and this is the first year that they're even in a World Cup. I could be wrong. They may have played in one of the first ones, but as far as I'm aware, there isn't any history. They actually were in 2016. They haven't played in the World Cup since the very first World Cup. So there's not a lot to go off of based on kind of precedents for this team. They just are very unknown in a lot of ways. So there's not a ton to make a kind of think of for this team. You go back to 2016, they did not do well. They were pretty quickly defeated in the Asia Pacific qualifier in that 2016 World Cup. I don't expect them to be much better, if better at all, really. Like I said, it's a tough group. I don't really see them doing super well. Interestingly enough, that 2016 group, they didn't do well, and the other teams that they kind of finished around were Hong Kong and the Philippines, who are also, interestingly enough, are in this group with them again. So if I had to guess, I would not put a ton of stock in this team doing very well. They actually went 0-2 -4 back then. Like I said, different roster entirely, tons of things to kind of consider, but usually those types of trends, those types of patterns are pretty common. I don't expect Indonesia to be a super high-performing team, unfortunately. I think this region in particular is tough, especially when you get to a team like South Korea, who we'll get to. It's very difficult to find a lot of success when you have to play against one of the best teams in the world in your group, and some other teams that just have shown more success consistently in their time in the league. So it's tough. We'll see what happens with Indonesia, but I wouldn't give them a ton I wouldn't give them a high chance to advance just based on kind of what we've seen from the other teams in this group. Up next is Japan, a very interesting roster for this World Cup. I can throw it up here. You can see it. You'll notice something very specific. That is that all of these players come from the same team, which is Veryl, a team in APAC contenders. So this team, their DPS trio is Nico, QKey, and Mihawk. They have tanks KSG and Plankton, and supports Mint and Cloud. This Viral team did decently well in APAC contenders. I don't even want to say decently well. They did well in APAC contenders. They finished third in the APAC region, beating teams like MDY in the upper bracket before losing to Rhodes and eventually losing to MDY again. But they were victorious over Envy, a team in the kind of region as well. So they had some success against some of the teams there, and I think it is certainly possible that this team does well in this region. I think they're probably one of the better teams in this group. They're a team that has a bunch of pre-existing synergy. They've played together for a bit. They've found some success already in APAC contenders, better than teams like Kraken Esports that I mentioned before when I was talking about the Taiwanese team. So I think this team should be pretty good. I think they have a lot of that flexibility you want. They know how to play with each other well. They did very well in contenders to get where they were, right? They had to do well to get there. I think they cover a lot of things you want. They have some of that flexibility. And I think, generally speaking, Japan is still a decent region here. There has been at least one Japanese player in the Overwatch League, which is relatively uncommon for a lot of countries around the world. There isn't a ton of talent really outside of like the US, China, and South Korea and Europe that gets into the Overwatch League. So even getting one player out of your group is a pretty big deal, or out of your country. So I think Japan is probably my second favorite team in this region in terms of chances to move on. I think they look stronger than the likes of Hong Kong and Indonesia. I think they'll be competitive with Taiwan, probably a bit better than them. Obviously, I think South Korea should be the favorite out of this group, but I think Japan's probably number 2 in this group, just based on what their roster is, kind of the history of this team. You have a lot of stuff to go off of about what this team has been and the success they've shown. To be good in APAC contenders means you got to be able to beat other teams, right? In order to advance out of the group, even if it was 5 teams that advanced, you have to find some success, right? They really only lost to Rhodes consistently, right? They beat MDY and they lost to MDY. So they split with them. They lost to Rhodes. Rhodes is a very, very good team. It's not really a problem to lose to Rhodes. So I do feel good about this Japan team. I think they look like they have the talent to at least make it into that top 16. Maybe do something when they get there. But I would argue, at least right now, this is the second best team in this group, until I've seen anything to really make me think otherwise. Up next, we have the Philippines roster, another team that did not do particularly well in the World Cup in 2016 when we saw them, like I mentioned before. They were in the World Cup in 2019 in the preliminaries. They lost 3-1 to Colombia in the their first and only game. So not a team with a ton of success historically in the World Cup. Like I said, 2016, they didn't have a great run. 2019, they didn't do particularly well. So not my ideal, once again, team in terms of the level of success you can expect, but you can see their roster here. They have a damage duo of Redux and Wukid, tanks Pugbutt and Roki, and supports Grande, Sauto, Chonli, and Marky. So, once again, a very interesting team to kind of look at. Grande Sauto, interesting. He was on the team in 2019 for that World Cup run, so he's back for this year. Certainly one of those things where you get to kind of see some of these names return, which is always really nice to see. But, like I said, this is a team that's in a tough spot. Philippines, not historically a kind of good level team. They haven't had a ton of success in the World Cup in qualifiers and whatnot. So it's hard to really expect tons and have high expectations for this team. But I don't think it's doom and gloom for teams like Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Philippines, right? They're not my picks to get out of this group, and I'll give you my definitive picks when I get to the end. You could probably figure it out by now. But I certainly think that those are the 3 countries that are the most interesting ones to watch for in this group, because they are going to be fighting with each other to try to match and meet teams like Taiwan and Japan. We all can accept South Korea is the best team in this group, so we all know that South Korea is one of the favorites to win the whole World Cup. They are going to be the best team in this group. It's pretty absurd to expect any of these teams to beat South Korea. So if you're the Philippines, if you're Hong Kong, if you're Indonesia, you're really trying to be the best of those 3. And then you really just have to be better than one of Japan or Taiwan, right? The road to victory is there. The road out of this group is very, very clear, and it's you need to just be better than 3 teams in this group. It's hard. It might not be possible for some of these teams, right? There's certainly ones that I think have a stronger shot. I think that if I had to pick of these kind of what I view as the more lower group teams, I think you're looking at Taiwan and Hong Kong as really the teams fighting for that spot. But the Philippines and Indonesia certainly can play spoiler. They certainly can do things that try to one-up the other and then potentially try to put themselves above Hong Kong and Taiwan. And maybe even Japan, you know? It's not impossible for that to happen. But it's certainly tough for some of these teams in the more kind of Pacific region to perform as well, right? Really the powerhouses when you think of contenders and just Overwatch in Asia in general are South Korea, are China, who of course are automatically qualified for the World Cup. They don't have to play through this qualifying event, which does open up the path for a team like the Philippines or Hong Kong or Indonesia or Taiwan to get in when maybe they wouldn't otherwise. So it's really South Korea, it's China, and then you kind of got Japan and Taiwan kind of in that next group below them. So it's tough, right? But I think there is a path to victory for these teams. There is a path in, but it really does come down to you have to be the best of these kind of bottom 3, and you have to be able to get that big steal that win away from a Taiwan or a Japan and knock them out, right? That's really the path to victory for some of these lower level teams in this group, or at least ones that we perceive to be lower level teams. The final team here, of course, like I said, is South Korea. I'll throw them up on the screen. You can see this roster. It's basically just the 2022 Dallas Fuel and a couple of friends. You can see here they have the DPS duo of Lip and Sparkle, tank line of Hanbin and Fearless, and then a support line of Fielder, Chio, and Finn. Really, really, really good team here. Obviously, Rush is the head coach this time around. Krusty was the coach in the past. This time, you're looking at Rush, which makes sense why there's a bunch of these Dallas Fuel guys. Or Element Mystic guys on this team. This is a really good roster. Obviously, you could always make the suggestion, well, you know, you'd rather have maybe Proper on this team, or you'd rather have Shu on this team, maybe. There's a lot of talent from South Korea. You could really make multiple teams out of South Korea, and it would still be very competitive. This is the roster, though, for a variety of reasons. And look, it's really good. This is one of the favorites to win the World Cup. South Korea has won all but one World Cup. They should be, once again, expected to at least be a top seed. They should be expected to be easily getting out of this group and really only meeting competition once they get to the top 16. That's just the reality of Overwatch as an esport. Korea dominates, and this region is really no different when you consider just the teams that you have here. So I think outside of South Korea, like I said, I would say Japan is probably my number 2 out of this group. I think that they have shown the most success as a whole. They're a team that does know each other pretty well. They have synergy. They've been playing in contenders. So basically you have a team that isn't going to get thrown together just for the year. They've been able to kind of build up some of that synergy and some of that success. And you base this team's kind of contender success on being in a group with players from countries like Taiwan and Hong Kong and Indonesia and the Philippines potentially, right? Like, they've shown success against those other teams in this region. So I think Japan is my second favorite team out of this group. And then, like I said, I think Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, that team is probably the third best team in this group. And then I would say Hong Kong is probably the only other team that could maybe punch their way in to this group. It's a tough group. Like I said, it's very, very tough when you have essentially one team that's a shoo-in, like guaranteed lock. It's very tough to then, you know, there's 3 spots up for grabs in this group, but really there's only 2 because South Korea is going to get in, right? If South Korea doesn't make it, it would be the greatest surprise in esports history. Like, regardless of esport, across all of esports, it would be the biggest upset in all of esports history. They are clearly top 3 in this group. They're clearly top 1 in this group. So really, there's 2 spots up for grabs. Who can get it between Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Philippines? If I were a betting individual, I would say Japan and Taiwan. Japan and Chinese Taipei. But it will definitely be interesting to see what we get out of Hong Kong, Indonesia, and the Philippines. I'm not super familiar with players from those regions. We don't see a lot of them in the esports scene in Overwatch. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what we get from them. History has never been really on their side, so I will say Japan, Taiwan will be the teams to make it out of this group alongside of South Korea. Well, let me know your thoughts on this group in the comments down below. Do you agree with me that that is the most likely team to advance? Do you think that is like the favorite here? Or do you think there's room potentially for some other team to get out of there? Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts. But that is all from me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.